on a very narrow topic. It's extremely condensed. I mean, a lot's there. So we're not going to do anything more than just touch our tongue to it today. That's all that will be possible. But I will try to introduce you all. Hello. Introduce you to some key passages and some ideas and raise your thoughts, I hope. Our sign-up sheet is passing around. Is that also one? Are you getting one?
I'm getting a copy from this one if you want.
Okay. Well,
Can I get your email? You've been here for a while.
I think what might be helpful is if I very quickly race through my main topics. You sort of get your mind set of what I'm going to try to cover in this time. For various octogenarian reasons, I hope to take a break in the middle of this session, maybe at 2:30 or something like that, and we can all at least say stand up and stretch. I hope to do that. But I want to begin. I had written notes, but I decided on coming down here. I want to start with the fact of the Cold War and anti-communism in the United States, and our having a book made by two Marxists on the topics of opposing capitalism and imagining a better world. Let me reduce this big book to say that here are two main topics: their opposition, fierce opposition to capitalism, and their equal passion for a new world, a new society, which is the name of the last section. But in order to do that, I want to go through Bernie Sanders and Naomi Klein, so that these guys are not anything unusual. They're not extreme. These are three comrades right here: Bernie and Naomi, and what their first name? Oh, Fred and Chris are with us today. Then I want to talk about, because I will draw your attention to the endings of Bernie's book and of Naomi's book. I'll do the same thing with this book. As I was thinking this morning, how will I somehow get us to some points here without it being utterly bewildering? There are thousands of entrances to this book. So I will discuss the last part for chapters 11 and 12 first, just as I am going to mention with Bernie and Naomi, the ending, that is, the hope of a better world and of a new society. I'll go into more detail with Magdoff and Williams. Can you hear me okay? Mm-hmm. My voice is developing. It's an interesting creature. And I study it and don't know what it's going to do. And I think I'm going to lower my voice so that I can write here with you. But part 4, chapter 11, performs a characteristic pattern. I was a literature teacher. I taught literary criticism. I was a pattern monger. I was a fiend for patterns. That's what I did for 40 years, was to see how Dickens' Bleak House progressed from its opening image to its last, and what were the stages. That kind of analysis I love to do. Well, Magdoff and Williams are constantly setting up wherever they go. They remind us why they're writing the book, and that is because capitalism has so screwed up our planet. At the beginning of part 4, we get one page or one paragraph about capitalism, which we heard from the beginning, it's just in different words. And then we have Wayne Vivere. Now, I studied several languages to get my degree. But I didn't study Spanish. Buen vivir, V-I-V-I-R, Spanish, B-U-E-N, buen, did I say bueno? This is buen, vivir, a very key word, because as it turns out, Magdoff and Williams are just like Naomi Klein, just like Kimmerer, the book by Kimmerer on Native American understanding of capitalism. They look to Native Americans for guidance, for values, and it's in Buen Vivir, which is the philosophy of good living by an extensive tribe of 10,000, 9,000 indigenous people in South America. That's part 4, chapter 11. Part 4, chapter 12, again, it opens with Trump and the Republican Party and capitalism. Page 305 and 306, just in case you want to mention it, jot down pages. Am I going so fast you can't possibly take notes? So I slowed down. But in just a few pages there, 305, 308, 310, 311, we get why we're writing a book. Number one, because our wonderful civilization, our planet, is being destroyed. And number two, we can say no to it and we can build a new world. Because that confidence has to be built, doesn't it? At the same time that the truth is told about what is happening to us today. So they spend a lot of time doing that, just as Bernie does the same thing. These are social critics. They call themselves revolutionaries. Bernie says he's a revolutionary, but it's not true. He's a reformist, and so is Naomi Klein, a reformist. They will not change the system, but they will modify it in such a way. Both of them would modify capitalism in such a way that it virtually amounts to a revolution. So I'm not going to quarrel with Bernie's title. Then let's circle back to part 2, with chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8, in which we then dig into whether or not we can actually build a better world. What gives us confidence that we can build a better world? And then part 2, chapter 5, that was it. That was part 2, chapter 5. Why are we confident in biology that we can build a better world? And chapter 6, why we can be confident in human nature. And the argument is what you and I learned in freshman biology, or freshman sociology, or freshman psychology. For me, that's 60 years old, and 70 years ago, that there isn't such a thing as a human nature. We're not stuck in capitalism. We can be different people in a different system which we create. So it's a very coherent book. It builds from the first page to the last to carry through its theses, and it repeats itself to be so that everyone remembers where they are as the book goes on. So, Sanders, revolutionary. I just want you to hear and taste the last page of his book, and I'll do the same thing with Naomi. Almost the last page. Where are you? Here we go. If you read this without me saying, if you had read this book, and then you read this without knowing about the two books and where they came from, you couldn't tell a great deal of difference in these particular paragraphs. But there's a big difference. There is another big difference between these two Marxists and Bernie. Here we go. The great crisis that we face as a nation is not just the objective problems that we face, Now here's his characteristic critique of capitalism that you will see about every third, 10th page in the book. A rigged economy, a corrupt campaign finance system, a broken criminal justice system, and the extraordinary threat of climate change. The more serious crisis, though, he says, is the limitation of our imagination. If we don't have imagination, we're not going to overcome these terrible limitations of capitalism. It is. Do we have people coming in? Hello. Welcome.
Hello, Nancy. Hi, Nancy.
Hello, Nancy. It is falling victim to an incredibly powerful establishment in human imagination is. Powerful establishment, economic, political, and media, that tells us every day in a million different ways that real change is unthinkable and impossible, that we have got to think small, not big, that we must be satisfied with the status quo. There are no alternatives to capitalism. Well, this is Bernie speaking from the heart, and he got almost enough voters to beat Miss Clinton. Think of it. The future of our country, and perhaps the world, requires us to break through these limitations. Humanity is at a crossroads. We can continue down the current path of greed, consumerism, oligarchy, poverty, war, racism, and environmental degradation, or we can lead the world and move into a very different direction. I suspect that Bernie has more synonyms for what he dislikes about capitalism than Madoff, than these Marxists over here.
Bernie has a lot of words.
I love this book. I love this book. I mean, it's a real guide to me. What is it when we call someone a progressive? What does that mean? And this book tells you what it means. But so does Naomi Klein. No is not enough. No, it is. No is not enough. We must go beyond saying no to capitalism. Just like Bertie, we must imagine another world. We must try to build another world, but first we have to imagine the world and believe that we can imagine it. Whereas, but we're surrounded every day, as Bernie just said, surrounded every day, saturated with, consume, grow, spin, drive, get a new car, that we can't imagine that there might be another way to live. I certainly have a difficult time finding time to imagine and being hopeful that there could be another way. So let me give you a taste of Naomi Klein, Bernie Sanders, Fred Magdoff, and Chris Williams. Let me get my note here. Page 262, okay. Okay. He's been describing Trump, and nobody can lay anyone out like Naomi Klein can do it. She has a lot of verve, doesn't she? You've read her writings. So she's been talking about Trump with the elevation of the basis of the basis of figures to the most exalted of positions of U.S. culture, or maximum, of U.S. culture, of maximum extraction, now another description of capitalism, of maximum extraction, or endless grabbing and disposing, has reached some kind of breaking point. Clearly, It is the culture itself that must be confronted now, and not policy by policy or reforms, but at the root, which is the essential aim and essential thesis of this book. It's the thesis of this book over here. Reforms are not making it. It's not something that I theorize about. It's not something abstract. If you're alive, you're watching it happen. And now we're at the end here of what is taking place in our country, the election of a man who was destroyed. So, I'd like to read that again, but I won't. But it gets to the root. We must get to the root, the heart of everything. And how are we going to do that? By imagining a different world, she says, just as Bertie does. And how does she imagine it? She ends her book with something called the LEAP Manifesto. I've heard several of you in this room mention this before, because several of you are reading other books where this, or keeping up with Naomi, or they read this book. But it's a manifesto that Canadians put together. And it's another collection of good ideas for what you might call progressive ideas, or Bertie would call revolutionary ideas. I count 16 principles. It's mainly because of where she has put type in bold, but about 16 principles. We know that the time for this great transition is short. And Bernie talks about the urgency all the time in his book. She does too. And urgency is at the beginning, middle, and end of this book. In other words, these three people have read the science. The scientists have taught us the urgency of these matters. And so she says, we know that the time for this great transition is short. Climate scientists have told us that this is the decade to take decisive action to prevent catastrophic global warming. That means, speaking Bernie, that means small steps will no longer get us where we need to go. So these are people with big conceptions about where we need to go, and we only have 10 years, she said. And I've read other things that have said the same thing. And we have in our room here 2 scientists who've been telling us this for a long time. I've known Art forever, and he's been making this warning as long as I can remember. And now Malcolm has recently written an article, a report, what you call it, Malcolm?
Started in 1975.
That lays it all out.
1975.
See how long this has been.
I have a copy here if anybody wants one.
I urge you all to get a copy from Malcolm. He's really put it all together in short space. I mean, the science of warming. Wonderful.
I don't know about short.
Well, I'm thinking compliment to. All right, you all. I think that's what I wanted to say as an introduction to the book. And now I want to go to part 4. How long have we been here? My voice is going.
We've got lots of time.
Let's say this at 2:30. We'll definitely take a break. So we go to part 4, and it's entitled Toward a New Society. The passion of these 2 people here for a new society, the trepidation that they feel about what has happened to our country and our planet. These people this is 2017, this is 2017, this is a little older. Is this 2016? That's not very old, is it? But these people are right up to 2016. They're talking about today, and their warning is to us. This person to what would you say, the book reading scientific community, the social sciences and the sciences. What is Naomi's audience, would you guess? The educated, literate, more literate people of the United States? I find her, this is a universal book. I think anyone can read Naomi. And Bernie Sanders' book also, this is a more exhilarating mode of writing than she has. Bernie and Fred and Chris have a more academic way of writing. But he does organize his ideas in 10 sections so that you can really reach some clarity with Bernie. So, Toward a New Society, Chapter 11 of Part 4 begins on page 283, in case you're making notes. 283 is a need for vision. A need for vision. All three are saying we've got to have vision. We can get all the facts and we can know what's happening. But we need also to imagine what the word is. I could bring that wonderful song, Imagine, and play it during some of this lecture here today. The Beatles play, who was that song? John Lennon's great song. And here's this pattern again, as the chapter begins. Cutthroat competition and deep structure inequity. That's what screws us up. I mean, he uses different words, chooses different emphases as the book goes on. And this is what we have to deal with. Oh, and by the way, he got a word from the great socialist William Morris in the 19th century, who was a novelist and poet and a great nonfiction prose writer also. But it was Morris who coined the term ILF. There's wealth, and then there's ILF. I-L-L-T-H. And this is what capitalism is all about. It's to produce ILF as we see our planet and our humanity down the drain. ILF, inequity, money, cutthroat competition. But people have great values. We have a great tradition of real wealth. And so he begins to list in just 2 pages, again, what his positive values are, as he has some very opening pages. This time, he puts 3 together. Cooperation. This will save us. Equity. Equity will save us. I one time, long ago, looked up the word equity because justice was being thrown around so much, especially by OMNI, since we named it justice and ecology. Peace, justice, and ecology. Well, justice simply means equity. If you look it up in the dictionary, you'll find that a dictionary will say justice is equity. Well, you say, well, what the hell is equity? And so you look up equity, and you find out that equity means fairness. That's all it means. And so Fred and Chris are saying, we've got to cooperate. We must build a world of fairness. And it must be democratic, and by that they mean bottom up. Bottom up, everything we do. Now this says, these 2 principles have drastic and radical consequences with a Marxist, because they follow them down the path of consistency to where you find democracy, and to look forward and backwards. Of course, you find democracy in a workplace, which is where people are. This is where we become human beings. To a Marxist, is how we pursue livelihood. In addition to these 3 principles, on page 284, we learned that they recommend full potential of each and all. Well, that's pretty difficult to take. I haven't been brought up in this at all. The full potential of each and all, that's to be our ideal, our idealism. Well, yes, to a Marxist it is. That's the fourth principle. The fifth principle, I'm covering 2 pages now. They're not organizing as well as I do. In a healthy world, in a fruitful biosphere. Sixth principle, an economy for people, not profit. And seventh, production under workers doing work. Under real workers, we know human beings doing work. And production is a key term throughout here, as those of you read any Marxist literature. It's engagement in work. It is so important. Now, that was a good combination, I thought. Those 7 principles. Those were good values to put together. And he changes them around, adds some, deletes some. And then on page 284, suddenly he springs on us, the values of a South American indigenous people called the Quechua, Quechua. How would you pronounce his name?
Quechua.
Did I get it right? Quechua?
Quechua.
Yeah. Buen vivir. So here on page 284, near the ending of his book, in the climax of his book, he reverts to indigenous values, which Naomi Klein threw out. This changes everything depends upon. And here too, but not as much as